Indian Rebellion of 1857. Historiography. ADIS examines the historiography with emphasis on the four major approaches: the Indian nationalist view, the Marxist analysis, the view of the rebellion as a traditionalist rebellion, and intensive studies of local uprisings. Many of the key primary and secondary sources appear in Biswamoy Patti, ed. 1857 Rebellion. Thomas Metcalfe has stressed the importance of the work by Cambridge professor Eric Stokes, especially Stokes' The Peasant and the Raj, Studies in Agrarian Society and Peasant Rebellion in Colonial India. Metcalfe says Stokes undermines the assumption that 1857 was a response to general causes emanating from entire classes of people. Instead, Stokes argues that 1. Those Indians who suffered the greatest relative deprivation rebelled, and that 2. The decisive factor in precipitating a revolt was the presence of prosperous magnates who supported British rule. Stokes also explores issues of economic development, the nature of privileged landholding, the role of moneylenders, the usefulness of classical rent theory, and, especially, the notion of the rich peasant. To Kim Wagner, who has conducted the most recent survey of the literature, modern Indian historiography is yet to move beyond responding to the prejudice of colonial accounts. Wagner sees no reason why atrocities committed by Indians should be understated or inflated merely because these things offend our post-colonial sensibilities. Wagner also stresses the importance of William Dalrymple's The Last Mughal, The Fall of a Dynasty, Delhi 1857. Dalrymple was assisted by Mahmud Farooqi, who translated key Urdu and Shikashta sources and published a selection in Besieged Voices from Delhi 1857. Dalrymple emphasized the role of religion and explored in detail the internal divisions and politico-religious discord amongst the rebels. He did not discover much in the way of proto-nationalism or any of the roots of modern India in the rebellion. Sabak Ahmed has looked at the ways in which ideologies of royalism, militarism, and jihad influenced the behavior of contending Muslim factions. Almost from the moment the first sepoys mutinied in Meerut, the nature and the scope of the Indian Rebellion of 1857 has been contested and argued over. Speaking in the House of Commons in July 1857, Benjamin Disraeli labelled it a national revolt, while Lord Palmerston, the Prime Minister, tried to downplay the scope and the significance of the event as a mere military mutiny. Reflecting this debate, an early historian of the rebellion, Charles Ball, used the word mutiny in his title but labelled it a struggle for liberty and independence as a people in the text. Historians remain divided on whether the rebellion can properly be considered a war of Indian independence or not, although it is popularly considered to be one in India. Arguments against include: a united India did not exist at that time in political, cultural, or ethnic terms. The rebellion was put down with the help of other Indian soldiers drawn from the Madras Army, the Bombay Army and the Sikh regiments. 80% of the East India Company forces were Indian. Many of the local rulers fought amongst themselves rather than uniting against the British. Many rebel sepoy regiments disbanded and went home rather than fight. Not all of the rebels accepted the return of the Mughals. The King of Delhi had no real control over the mutineers. The revolt was largely limited to North and Central India. Whilst risings occurred elsewhere, they had little impact because of their limited nature. A number of revolts occurred in areas not under British rule and against native rulers, often as a result of local internal politics. The revolt was fractured along religious, ethnic and regional lines. A second school of thought, while acknowledging the validity of the above-mentioned arguments, opines that this rebellion may indeed be called a war of India's independence. The reasons advanced are: even though the rebellion had various causes, most of the rebel sepoys who were able to do so made their way to Delhi to revive the old Mughal empire that signified national unity for even the Hindus amongst them. There was a widespread popular revolt in many areas such as Awadh, Bundelkhand and Rohilkhand. The rebellion was therefore more than just a military rebellion, and it spanned more than one region. The sepoys did not seek to revive small kingdoms in their regions, instead they repeatedly proclaimed a country-wide rule of the Mughals and vowed to drive out the British from India, as they knew it then. The objective of driving out foreigners from not only one's own area but from their conception of the entirety of India, signifies a nationalist sentiment. The mutineers, although some were recruited from outside Uda, displayed a common purpose. 150th Anniversary. The Government of India celebrated the year 2007 as the 150th anniversary of India's first War of Independence. Several books written by Indian authors were released in the anniversary year, including Amresh Mishra's War of Civilizations, a controversial history of the rebellion of 1857, and Recalcitrance by Anurag Kumar, one of the few novels written in English by an Indian based on the events of 1857. In 2007, a group of retired British soldiers and civilians, some of them descendants of British soldiers who died in the conflict, attempted to visit the site of the siege of Lucknow. However, fears of violence by Indian demonstrators, supported by the Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, prevented the British visitors from visiting the site. Despite the protests, Sir Mark Havelock was able to make his way past police to visit the grave of his ancestor, General Henry Havelock. In popular culture, films. Light of India, a 1929 short American silent film directed by Elmer Clifton and filmed in Technicolor, depicts the rebellion. Bengal Brigade, a 1954 film, at the outbreak of the Indian Mutiny. A British officer, Captain Claiborne, is cashiered from his regiment over a charge of disobeying orders, but finds that his duty to his men is far from over. Shatranj Ke Khilari, a 1977 Indian film directed by Satyajit Ray, chronicling the events just before the onset of the Revolt of 1857. The focus is on the British annexation of Oudh and the detachment of the nobility from the political sphere in 19th century India. Jinon, directed by Shyam Benegal, it is a critically acclaimed film about the love affair between a Pathan feudal chief and a British girl sheltered by his family during the revolt. Mangal Pandey, The Rising, Ketan Mehta's Hindi film chronicles the life of Mangal Pandey. The Charge of the Light Brigade features a sequence inspired by the massacre at Kanpur. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. During the dinner scene at the fictional Pankot Palace, Indiana Jones mentions that Captain Blumbert was telling him about the role which the palace played in the mutiny, and Chattar Lal complains, "It seems the British never forget the mutiny of 1857. The Last Cartridge, an incident of the Sepoy Rebellion in India, a fictionalized account of a British fort besieged during the rebellion. Victoria and Abdul. Queen Victoria embarrasses herself by recounting to the court the one-sided account of the Indian mutiny that Abdul had told her. Victoria, faith and trust in him are shaken and she decides he must go home. But soon after, she changes her mind and asks him to stay. Manikarnika, the Queen of Jhansi, a 2019 Hindi film chronicles the life of Rani Lakshmibai. Theatre. 1857, Ek Safarnama, a play by Javed Siddiqui, set during the rebellion of 1857 and staged at Purana Killa, Delhi. Literature. Malcolm X's autobiography. The autobiography of Malcolm X details his first encounters with atrocities in the non-British world and his reaction to the rebellion and massacres in 1857. John Masters's novel Nitronas of Bengal, first published by Michael Joseph in 1951 and dedicated to the Sepoy of India, is a fictionalized account of the rebellion as seen through the eyes of a British captain in the Bengal native infantry who was based in Bhovani, itself a fictionalized version of the town of Jhansi. Captain Savage and his turbulent relationship with the Rani of Kishanpur form an analogous interrelationship of the Indian people and the British and Sepoy regiments at that time. J.G. Farrell's 1973 novel The Siege of Krishnapur details the siege of the fictional Indian town of Krishnapur during the rebellion. George MacDonald Fraser's 1975 novel Flashman in the Great Game deals with the events leading up to and during the rebellion. Two of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories, The Sign of the Four and The Adventure of the Crooked Man, feature events that took place during the rebellion. Michael Crichton's 1975 novel The Great Train Robbery mentions the rebellion and briefly details the events of the siege of Kanpur, as the rebellion was happening in tandem with the trial of Edward Pierce. The majority of M.K's novel Shadow of the Moon is set between 1856 to 58, and the rebellion is shown to greatly affect the lives of the main characters, who were inhabitants of the residency at Lunjore. The early chapters of her novel The Far Pavilions take place during the rebellion, which leads to the protagonist, a child of British ancestry, being raised as a Hindu. Indian writer Ruskin Bond's fictional novella A Flight of Pigeons is set around the Indian Rebellion of 1857. It is from this story that the film Jinon was later adapted in 1978 by Shyam Benegal. The 1880 novel The Steam House by Jules Verne takes place in the aftermath of the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Jules Verne's famous character Captain Nemo, originally an Indian prince, fought on the side of the rebels during the rebellion. E. M. Foster's 1924 novel A Passage to India alludes several times to the mutiny. Flora Annie Steele's novel On the Face of the Waters describes incidents of the mutiny. The plot of H. Beam Piper's science fiction novel Ular Uprising is based on the events of the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Rujub, The Juggler and In Times of Peril, A Tale of India by G. A. Henty are each based on the Indian Rebellion of 1857.